Imagine a night in 1889 New Mexico, when the most feared Comanche warrior on the frontier had ever known. Red Elk, the giant accused of murdering soldiers, stood frozen in the firelight because a tiny girl with his own eyes walked straight past him and curled up asleep on the lap of a white widow he had never met. They called him a monster. She was only searching for her missing husband. Neither knew the desert had already decided they belonged to the same broken family. One red leather cord, two lost souls, and the moment a child's quiet breathing rewrote every legend the West thought it knew. Stay until the end. You'll never guess how a single gunshot and a whispered, "Shoot me first," changed 3 lives forever. If this already tugs at your heart, hit subscribe, drop your city or country in the comments, and let's ride through the dust together. You won't want to miss what happens at sunrise on that red cliff. The summer of 1889 burned the New Mexico territory the color of dried blood. Heat rose off the sand in glassy waves, and every living thing moved slowly or died, trying. From the Malpais to the Sangre de Cristos, word traveled on the hot wind. $500, dead or alive, for the Comanche they called Red Elk. Cavalry posters flapped on saloon walls, showing a giant with 3 claw scars down his face and eyes black as spent powder. Folks said he could ride out of a sandstorm, cut a man's throat, and vanish before the body hit the ground. They never mentioned the part about the wife he buried in a shallow grave, or the 3-year-old daughter dragged away screaming by slavers while he lay bleeding 2 miles back. Dry Gulch sat at the edge of nowhere, a dozen sun-bleached buildings huddled around a single muddy waterhole. When Meredith Hale walked in, leading a dusty child by the hand, conversation died like a snuffed candle. Meredith was 32, raw-boned, sunburned to leather, eyes the pale gray of winter sky. The little girl beside her couldn't have been more than 4. Black hair thick as a Mustang's tail, cheekbones sharp enough to cut paper, skin the color of coffee with 1 drop of cream. Around her neck hung a thin red leather cord with a single hawk feather and a bead the shade of fresh blood. Folks stared, spat, and looked away. Half-breed young'un meant trouble. A white widow dragging one meant double. Meredith didn't give a damn what they thought. Her husband, Samuel Hale, had vanished 6 weeks earlier when the Lucky Dollar mine at Red Gulch caved in, or so the company telegram claimed. She knew Samuel. He could smell silver through solid rock. If he were dead, she'd see the body. If he wasn't, somebody was working him to death in a hole nobody was supposed to know about. Either way, she aimed to find out. The preacher, old Harlan with the whiskey voice, caught her sleeve outside the church. "Red Gulch is 30 miles of hell with rattlesnakes for greeters," he rasped. "Only one man alive can get you there and bring you back breathing." Meredith didn't blink. "Who?" Harlan glanced toward the dark line of mesas. "The same devil the cavalry's hunting. Red Elk." She found him 3 days later, camped in a half-collapsed adobe ruin, where the wind screamed through the cracks like a dying woman. Meredith rode up slowly, Winchester across her thighs, Tala tied to the saddle in front of her because the child refused to be left behind. The air tasted of creosote and old blood. She stepped down 30 yards out, rifle ready, and waited. The door flap moved. He filled the opening like a storm cloud. Bare-chested, buckskin leggings, 3 white scars glowing against copper skin. The Henry repeater in his hands never wavered. "Turn around, woman," he said, in English rough as broken glass. Right away. Meredith didn't move. "I need a guide to Red Gulch." His eyes flicked to the child. Tala, half asleep from the heat, slid off the horse, toddled straight past the fire ring, and without a word, curled up against Meredith's leg and closed her eyes. The movement was so natural, it looked practiced 1,000 nights. Red Elk's breath stopped. The rifle barrel dipped a fraction. He stared at the little girl's face, at the red cord around her neck, at the hawk feather stirring in the hot wind. Something inside him cracked open with a sound no one could hear but him. Meredith felt the shift in the air, the way a person feels thunder before the sky splits. She kept her voice level. "I'm not here to sell her or trade her. I'm here because I need to know if my husband's alive. You want money? Name your price. You want something else? Say it plain." Red Elk didn't answer right away. The sun hammered down, turning the sand to molten brass. Finally, he spoke, voice low enough to rattle bones. "Leave the child here tonight. Come back at dawn. If she still breathes when the sun rises, I take you to Red Gulch." Meredith's finger tightened on the trigger. "She stays with me." He studied her for a long minute, then stepped aside, letting the shadow of the ruin swallow them both. That night, the wind howled like wolves around the crumbling walls. Meredith sat with her back to the adobe, Colt in her lap, Tala's small body warm against her side. Across the dying fire, Red Elk never blinked, never moved, eyes fixed on the child's sleeping face, as though memorizing every breath. Just before dawn, when the sky bled from black to bruised purple, he spoke one sentence that changed everything. "That cord around her neck, only a father ties it that way." Meredith looked down at the sleeping girl, then up at the scarred giant silhouetted against the first red edge of sunrise. For the first time in 6 weeks, fear tasted different, sharper, colder, and aimed straight at her heart. She didn't know it yet, but the desert had already chosen its ending. The fire had burned down to a nest of red eyes when Red Elk finally moved. He rose without a sound, crossed the ruined room in 3 strides, and crouched so close, Meredith smelled the iron of old blood on his skin. Moonlight through the broken roof carved silver across the scars on his face. "Show me the cord," he said. Meredith eased the sleeping child forward. Tala sighed, turned her face into Meredith's thigh, but didn't wake. Red Elk's thick fingers that could snap a neck like kindling, hovered over the red leather, not quite touching. The hawk feather trembled in the draft. The bead was carved from pipestone, the exact shade his wife had worn in her hair the morning the soldiers came. "Where did you take her from?" His voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of every grave he'd dug. Meredith met his stare. "I didn't take her. I buried her mother." She told it flat and hard, the way a man reports a killing, how she'd ridden out after rumors of a burned wagon train, found the circle of blackened Conestogas still smoking, 27 bodies swollen in the heat. The woman lay on her back, arms flung wide, chest torn open by a .50 caliber buffalo gun. Clutched against her was a child smeared head to toe in blood and ash, still breathing. The red cord had slipped from the mother's neck to the child's during the struggle. Meredith cut it free of the dead woman's braid, tied it again around the little girl's throat, so the spirits would know whose daughter she was. Red Elk listened without blinking. When she finished, the only sound was the wind clawing at the adobe, and Tala's soft breath against Meredith's skirt. He stood so fast, the shadows jumped. "You lie easy for a white woman." Meredith's Colt cleared leather before the echo died. "I buried 26 others that day. Want me to name the brands on their wagons? Want me to tell you which one still had coffee boiling when I got there?" Silence stretched like rawhide in the sun. Then Red Elk did something Meredith never expected. He dropped to one knee, reached past her, and brushed a single fingertip across the child's cheek. Tala stirred, murmured something in sleep, and burrowed deeper into Meredith's lap. The giant's hand froze mid-air, shaking like a man touching fire for the first time in years. Outside, a coyote yipped once and was cut off sharply, probably by something bigger. Red Elk spoke to the dark. 4 winters ago, soldiers hit our camp at dawn. I was hunting, came back to smoke and screaming. My woman, Mourning Dove, fought with a skinning knife until they shot her off her feet. They took the girl. I tracked the slavers for 3 days, killed 4, lost the trail in the Malpais. Since then, I track ghosts. He looked at Meredith then, really looked, as if seeing past skin and grief to the bone beneath. You kept her alive. It wasn't a question. Meredith holstered the Colt. She kept me alive. After Samuel disappeared, I had nothing left but questions and a grave to dig for myself. That child wouldn't let go of my hand. Red Elk stood. The fire popped, sending a ribbon of sparks up into the night. At first light, we ride for Red Gulch. Meredith's heart kicked. You'll guide me? I will guide the child home, he said. You come because she will not leave you. He turned away, but not before she saw the glint of wet on the scarred cheek that wasn't scarred. Later, when the moon hung low and cold, Meredith woke to find Red Elk sitting outside the doorway, back against the wall, rifle across his knees, staring at the stars as they owed him answers. Tala had crawled from Meredith's bedroll sometime in the night, and now slept curled against the same way against the warrior's thigh, small fist tangled in the fringe of his leggings. Red Elk didn't move, didn't breathe too deeply, afraid the dream would break. Meredith watched from the shadows, throat tight. She had come looking for a guide. Instead, she'd stumbled into a ghost story that was still bleeding. Dawn came brutal and red. Red Elk saddled a spare paint horse without a word, lifted Tala onto the saddle in front of Meredith like she weighed nothing. The child yawned, rubbed her eyes, then reached up and patted the warrior's scarred cheek with perfect trust. Red Elk flinched as if burned, then steadied the horse with one huge hand. Meredith swung up behind the child. How long to Red Gulch? 3 days if the devil don't ride with us, he answered. 2 if he does. He mounted his own black stallion, turned its head north, and kicked it into a trot. Meredith followed, dust already rising behind them like smoke from a fresh grave. Neither looked back at the ruined adobe. Neither needed to. The desert had already spoken. Dust swallowed the ruined adobe before the sun cleared the mesas, and the 3 of them rode north into country that looked like God had shaken out a sack of broken knives and left them to rust. Red Elk set a killing pace. Noon water stops only long enough for the horses to blow, no fire at night. He rode point 20 yards ahead, eyes scanning every draw and greasewood clump, like he expected the sand itself to sprout rifles. Meredith kept the paint in his tracks, Tala tied snug against her chest with a rawhide sling so the child could sleep without falling. The girl dozed through most of it, small head bobbing with the horse's gait, trusting the rhythm of Meredith's heartbeat, the way other children trusted cradles. First day, they crossed the Malpais, black lava rock sharp enough to slice boot leather. Red Elk walked his stallion across the worst stretches, leading Meredith's mount by the bridle. Heat hammered down until the air shimmered like water over a stove. Mirage lakes danced ahead, mocking them. Meredith's lips cracked and bled. She wet them with the last swallow from her canteen and gave the rest to Tala. Second dawn, they hit the true dead country. White alkali flats that burned eyes and blistered hooves. Salt crust crunched under iron shoes. Red Elk cut west around a dry lake, reading the land the way a preacher reads scripture. He found water twice, once a seep under an overhang where he dug with his hands, until a muddy trickle filled their hats. Once a tinaja tank, holding rainwater green as poison but sweet enough to keep them alive. Afternoon of the second day, the wind turned mean. A norther slammed down from Colorado, driving sand like birdshot. Visibility dropped to 10 feet. Red Elk threw his blanket over Tala and Meredith, pulled them into the lee of a sandstone fin. They crouched there 3 hours, while the storm screamed overhead, sand hissing across rock like a nest of sidewinders. When it passed, the world looked scoured clean, every track erased, every landmark gone. That night, they camped in a dry wash without fire. Red Elk sat with his back to a boulder, sharpening his knife in slow, deliberate strokes. Meredith cleaned her Winchester by starlight, checking loads one by one. Tala, exhausted, crawled straight to the warrior this time, curled against his thigh like a pup, and was asleep before Meredith could stop her. Red Elk froze, knife halfway to the whetstone, then let his free hand settle, barely touching, on the child's dark hair. Meredith watched the small miracle and felt something shift inside her chest, hard and irreversible. The third day broke hotter than a forge. They climbed into broken red canyons, where the walls rose sheer 500 feet, striped rust and bone. Buzzards circled high, patient as bankers. Red Elk reined in suddenly, raised a fist. Meredith halted beside him. Below, in the canyon floor, fresh sign. Shod hoofprints cutting across their trail, heading the same direction. 8, maybe 10 riders. Iron-shod horses, heavy loads, supply mules, not cavalry. Governor Leland's men, Red Elk said, running silver out the back door of Red Gulch. Meredith's stomach knotted. If Leland's crew spotted them first, there'd be no questions asked, just bullets. Red Elk studied the tracks, then the wind, the sun. Then he did something that chilled her worse than any threat. He smiled, a thin, terrible slash across his scarred face. We ride their shadow. They lead us straight to the mine. They dropped off the rim at dusk, picking their way down a goat trail no white man would attempt. Halfway down, thunder growled in the west. Dry lightning forked across black clouds. No rain. The temperature plunged 20 degrees in minutes. Meredith shrugged into her coat, wrapped Tala tighter. Red Elk never slowed. Near midnight, they smelled wood smoke and lamp oil. Red Elk killed their pace to a walk, slid off his horse, and motioned Meredith down. They crept to the canyon rim on foot. Below, hidden in a sidebox, lanterns glowed around a stamped mill and shack cluster, the illegal workings of Red Gulch. Armed guards patrolled with lanterns. In the center, chained to a windlass, a line of men hauled ore buckets in the dark, ghosts in rags, faces hollow as skulls. Meredith's breath caught. One of those scarecrows lifted his head at the wrong angle of light, and she saw Samuel's profile, gaunt, bearded, but alive. Before she could move, Red Elk's hand clamped her shoulder like iron. Wait. From the darkness behind them came the metallic snick of hammers cocking. 6 riders stepped out of the rocks, rifles leveled. The leader, a thick-necked sergeant with a deputy badge he had no right to wear, grinned with yellow teeth. "Evening, Breed. The governor wants a word with you, and the woman. Child, too. Bonus." Red Elk didn't flinch. He looked once at Tala asleep in Meredith's arms, then at the chained men below, then straight into the sergeant's eyes. "Tell Leland," he said, soft as death. "The desert is coming for him." The sergeant laughed, and that was his last mistake. "If you're feeling the heat rising and the dust in your throat right now, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss tomorrow night's chapter. This story's about to explode worse than black powder in a hot stove, and I'd hate for you to get left behind in the sand." The first rifle butt took Red Elk across the temple and dropped him like a poleaxed steer. Boots rained in, ribs, kidneys, face, until the night blurred red. Meredith lunged, Colt half drawn, but a loop of rawhide snapped around her wrists, and jerked her arms behind her back. Tala screamed once, a thin knife of sound, before a filthy hand clamped over her mouth. Then darkness swallowed everything. She came to a pole corral that stank of human waste and despair. Moonlight striped through the gaps between logs. Tala lay curled against her side, trembling but unhurt. Across the compound, Red Elk hung by his wrists from a cottonwood limb, head lolling, blood dripping steadily from his scalp onto the dust. Lanterns bobbed as guards laughed and drank, passing a jug of rot gut, betting how long the big breed would last. Meredith tested the rawhide on her wrists, tight but not cruelly clever. She worked it slowly, sawing against the rough log behind her. Hours bled away. The jug emptied, the laughter thinned. Most guards drifted to the bunkhouse, leaving 2 on watch and 1 kid, 19 maybe, freckled, eyes too wide for the job. The kid paced past the corral every 10 minutes, Winchester cradled as it might bite him. Third time around, he stopped, stared at Tala's sleeping face, then at the red cord around her neck. His throat worked. He glanced toward Red Elk, then back to the child. Something broke across his features, recognition, shame, fear. He knelt, voice a cracked whisper. That cord. My outfit rode with Captain Hargrove 4 years back. We hit a Comanche camp at dawn. 1 warrior was gone hunting. Came back roaring like a grizzly, killed 4 of us with a skinning knife before we rode him down and left him for dead. His woman fought till they shot her off her feet. A little girl got dragged off by slavers riding with us that day. I was green, didn't stop it. Meredith's hand stilled on the rawhide. You were there? The kid nodded, sick. That warrior, he's the one hanging yonder, ain't he? And this is his girl. He looked over his shoulder. The other guards were snoring against the mill wall. He drew his belt knife, sliced Meredith's bonds in 1 quick motion. I owe him my life. Slavers sold me too, 6 months later. He cut me loose outside Fort Griffin, never asked my name. Said debts get paid when the wind turns. Meredith rubbed circulation back into her wrists. Keys. On the sergeant's belt. He's drunk enough to skin. She studied the kid, saw the tremor in his hands, the sweat on his upper lip. You do this. There's no walking it back. I know. He slipped away, silent as a shadow. Minutes later, the sergeant grunted. The bottle clattered. Keys jingled. The kid was back, breathing like he'd run 10 miles. He handed her the ring, then cut the rope binding the corral gate. Get the breed down. I'll keep watch. Meredith ghosted across the compound. Red Elk's weight had stretched his arms until his shoulders screamed. She sliced the rope. He dropped hard, knees buckling. Blood crusted his face, 1 eye swollen shut. But when she touched his cheek, he came awake, snarling, ready to kill. It's me, she hissed. We're leaving. He focused, saw Tala in her arms, and the fight drained out of him like water from a punctured canteen. The kid appeared with Red Elk's knife and Henry repeater. Red Elk took them without thanks, checked the loads by feel. They moved toward the horse pen. Sudden shout. One of the drunks had woken for a piss and seen the empty rope. Lanterns flared. Rifles cracked. Bullets whined off rock and splintered timber. Red Elk shoved Meredith and Tala behind an ore cart. Run for the canyon mouth. I hold them. No. Meredith levered around into her Winchester. We all leave, or none of us do. The kid stepped up beside them, rifle raised. 3 rifles beat 20, but not by much. Go! They bolted. Lead chased them across the compound, spanging off the stamp mill, kicking dust at their heels. Tala buried her face in Meredith's neck and didn't make a sound. They hit the narrow trail that climbed the canyon wall, switchback goat path slick with loose shale. Halfway up, Red Elk spun, dropped to 1 knee, and started working the Henry with the calm of a man shelling peas. 3 guards went down before the rest found cover. The kid fired beside him until his barrel glowed cherry red. Meredith kept climbing, lungs on fire, Tala's weight cutting into her arms. At the rim, she turned. Red Elk and the kid were still 30 yards below, pinned by a dozen rifles. Moonlight painted everything silver and black. She set Tala down, braced the Winchester on a rock, and began picking targets. 1 guard spun and fell. Another dropped his rifle and ran. The return fire slackened. Red Elk rose then, huge, terrible, unstoppable, and walked straight into the storm of bullets, like he had a date with death and was early. The kid screamed something lost in the roar, then followed. They reached the rim together, bleeding but upright. Below, lanterns scattered as the surviving guards realized the devil they'd caught had slipped the rope. Red Elk looked at the kid, nodded once, payment acknowledged, debt closed. Then he lifted Tala into his arms for the first time. The child's head found the hollow of his shoulder, as it had always belonged there. Meredith reloaded by feel, eyes on the dark trail ahead. Somewhere behind them, Governor Leland's men were already saddling up. The night wasn't finished with them yet. They ran the horses until foam flecked their mouths and the animals staggered. Behind them, torches bobbed along the canyon floor like angry fireflies. Leland's riders, 20 strong now, drunk on rage and whiskey. The trail narrowed to a knife-edge ridge above a 1,000-foot drop. One side sheer cliff, the other a slope of loose scree that slid away under every step. No way around, only forward, to the dead-end shelf the old ones called Devil's Anvil. Red Elk reined in first. Below, the ridge pinched to 6 feet wide, with the abyss yawning on both sides. Sunrise bled across the sky, rust and bone, turning the rock the color of fresh liver. He swung down, handed Tala to Meredith, then slapped the horses over the edge. The animals screamed once as they fell, buying silence. Samuel stumbled up last, chains still dangling from one wrist, eyes wild. "They'll hang us all." "Shut up and load," Meredith snapped, tossing him the dead kid's Winchester. Samuel fumbled with cartridges as they burned him. Red Elk took position at the choke point, Henry repeater steady on a boulder. The kid, name turned out to be Billy Tate, lay dead 20 yards back, chest torn open by a 50 sharps. Debt paid in full. The first riders crested the ridge at full gallop. Red Elk's rifle cracked like a bullwhip. The lead horse somersaulted, rider flying into space without a sound. Second and third piled into the wreck, screaming. The rest milled, cursing, trying to form a line on ground too narrow for it. Meredith knelt beside Red Elk, working her Winchester in a steady rhythm. Brass spun away, glinting in the newborn light. Samuel fired twice, missed both times, then dropped the rifle and backed against the cliff wall, shaking. Leland himself rode in the center now, fat, red-faced, silver conchos flashing on his hatband. He raised a hand, firing slackened. "Throw down," he bellowed. "Woman and breed come quiet. The prospector walks. That's the deal." Meredith leveraged another round. "Go to hell." Leland laughed, signaled. 4 men dismounted, spreading out with ropes and shackles. They advanced slowly, using dead horses for cover. Red Elk glanced at Tala, crouched behind a rock with her hands over her ears. Then at Meredith, sweat and powder soot streaked her face. Something passed between them. No words, just the hard understanding of people who've already counted the cost. He stood up, empty-handed, and walked forward into the open. Rifles swung to him. Leland grinned wider. Red Elk kept walking until he stood 10 paces from the muzzles. Wind whipped his braids. Blood from the scalp wound had crusted black across his chest. "Shoot," he said in English. clear enough for every man to hear, but the child watches. One rider shifted, uneasy. Another spat, but he didn't raise his gun. Leland's grin faltered. "Take him!" The four advanced. Red Elk exploded. No warning, just sudden, terrible motion. He caught the first man's rifle barrel, jerked him forward, and drove the stock into the man's temple. Second man swung a Colt. Red Elk stepped inside, blade flashing once. The third tried to club him. Red Elk took the blow on the shoulder, wrapped the man like a bear, and pitched him screaming over the edge. The fourth turned to run and met Meredith's bullet between the shoulder blades. Silence fell, broken only by wind and the click of Red Elk reloading. Leland's face had gone the color of tallow. He yanked his Schofield, leveled it past Red Elk, straight at Meredith. "I'll start with the woman." Red Elk didn't move. Meredith rose slowly, Winchester hanging loose at her side. She stepped forward until the muzzle kissed her breastbone. "Then shoot me first," she said. The words hung in the cold air like frost. Leland's finger whitened on the trigger. Red Elk moved, faster than anything that size had a right to. He crossed the 10 paces in a blur, caught Leland's wrist, and twisted. Bone snapped like green mesquite. The Schofield fired once into the sky. Red Elk drove his knee into Leland's gut, folded him like cheap paper, then hurled the governor after his man, straight into the void. Leland's scream lasted 4 full seconds. The remaining riders looked at their broken leader disappearing, looked at the giant Comanche standing calm with blood on his hands, looked at the white woman who hadn't flinched. Rifles lowered. One by one, they backed their horses, turned, and rode south without a word. Dawn broke full, turning the canyon walls to living fire. Samuel sank to his knees, sobbing thanks nobody wanted to hear. Meredith walked to Red Elk, took Tala from the rock. The child reached out both arms, one toward Meredith, one toward the warrior. Red Elk hesitated, then lifted her gently. Tala touched the fresh blood on his cheek, then lay her head on his shoulder with a sigh. Meredith unknotted the rawhide thong from her own neck, simple braid she'd made from horsehair during the ride. She tied it beside the red cord, knotting them together so the hawk feather rested against the darker strand. Red Elk looked at the joined cords, then at her. No words. None needed. Far below, buzzards were already circling the broken bodies on the rocks. Up on the anvil shelf, 3 people stood in the newborn sun. One family forged in gun smoke and silence, bound tighter than blood. The wind carried the scent of creosote and freedom north, and for the first time in years, Red Elk turned his face into it without tasting only grief. The dust has settled on that red cliff, but the echo of a child's quiet breathing and a woman's steady, "Shoot me first," still rides the wind across New Mexico. If this story carved something into your chest tonight, anger, hope, or just the raw taste of frontier justice, drop a word in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from, what hit you hardest, or what you'd have done on that anvil shelf at sunrise. Your voice keeps these old trails alive. Thanks for riding every mile with me. Sleep with your boots off tonight, and I'll meet you back here tomorrow when the next fire's lit and another forgotten legend steps out of the dark. Until then, keep your powder dry.